Thank you for joining. Be'ezus Hashem, there will be others joining as well. And it's such a schus after what an incredible Chag, what an incredible Sukkos, what an incredible Tishrei, what an incredible just collection of incredible opportunities for connection. You come out on the other side, especially I would say in context of what last year's post Sukkos looked like. I mean, just in comparison alone, what a privilege, that we're in a totally different space than we were last year, and we're riding off the energy instead of just hitting a brick wall, which I think all of us felt to one degree or another last year, maybe even much worse than that. And we're really able to take what we gained, and there's it's an open portal, and it's up to us to drag and draw all of those energies, all of the investment of our time, of our prayers, our tefillos, our mitzvos, everything that we accomplished over this remarkable month, and to bring that now with us into quote unquote real life, to extend the avodah of Sukkos, which was the idea of leaving our home and going out into the world and conquering it for the divine. That's the idea of building a sukkah, which enables us to take a stretch of land that we have that's ordinarily just used for mundane purposes, whether it's a person's deck or a porch or a backyard, or like they call it over here, a garden, and you build a little hut, and all of a sudden it's the clouds of glory, and that's in a sense a microcosm of a representation of all of what Jewish living is supposed to accomplish with every aspect of life. It's just sukkah building. It's finding ways to transform the mundane into a conscious experience of the Creator. And so now is in a sense, now's where the real work starts. This is it. And Hashem has given us the opportunity this year, which, with an open door, without any blockages, to enable us with Hashem's help to take all of those energies and all of that ratzon and that yearning and that goodwill and that investment that all of us have invested over Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkos, and to now really live it, to really, really live it. And what a privilege, Ashreinu, what a privilege to have been charged with this great opportunity and responsibility. So with Hashem's help, we're going to carry on with our series in Sichos HaRan. Today's a particularly exciting shir because we are going to reach, with Hashem's help, the 100th lesson, which is almost exactly a third of the Sefer, which you've been learning for a number of years now. So it's a big milestone to reach the 100th teaching for those who have been with us from the beginning, for those who are here live on the Zoom, for those who will be listening to this recording afterwards. Mazel Tov, Ashreinu, a huge accomplishment, and I really do feel like we're just getting started and getting into the heart of the Sefer now. So I'm going to share my screen with huge appreciation to all of you for joining at what I appreciate is a bit of a random time for here in the UK and in the States as well as in Eretz Yisrael. So we're going to try maybe to shift the timing around so that it should maybe be more close to lunchtime in the States, and we'll try, but that's the difficulty of living in different time zones. It's really difficult to find a time that just works for everyone. So I appreciate the extra extending yourself to be here. It means the world, and it's such a schus to learn with all of you. So here I'm going to share my screen, and let's jump into it. So we have two sort of shorter teachings today. This year might be a little bit shorter than usual, before moving ahead to some of the other, just going to admit them. So before moving ahead to the next few teachings that will require a greater commitment of time. So let's take a look here first at Sichos HaRan Sadi Tes 99. And Rabbi Nachman says the most beautiful thing. Before we look at the actual words, it's just important to know that in Breslov, one of the primary innovations of Rabbi Nachman was the idea of Sichas Chaverim, which literally means the discussion of friends, friendly discussion. But it wasn't just hanging out and talking about politics or the news or the weather. Sichas Chaverim meant when two Jews would get together and speak with each other in an incredibly open and authentic and vulnerable way about life, really. About Avodas Hashem, but Avodas Hashem for real is all of life. just to talk about the things that are really worth talking about, the things that actually matter. To talk about a person's personal development, about their growth, what they're working on, what they're finding challenging, what they're succeeding in, what's going on in their relationships, what's going on with their learning, with their davening, each person with their own lives, in terms of the essence of why it is that we're alive. Most of our conversations are very shallow. We're going to learn about that in the next piece. Most of our conversations have to do with the practicalities that we necessarily deal with as human beings who are alive. But to try to have conversations that center around the essential fact of being alive in the first place, that relate to why it is that we're on this planet, that therefore we need to get from point A to point B. And Hashem gave this incredible invention that's called a car. And the car sometimes has wheels that have a flat. And so now you have to have a whole conversation about a flat tire. It's good, but we didn't come down to this world to drive a car to get a flat, right? Meaning, and it's not even about where you happen to have been going. It's the fact that you're here, And so to have conversations that revolve around that point, that essential point, that was called Sichos HaRan. And today sometimes that's sort of like replicated in some sense with a therapist. It could be, but it used to be that people had real heart-to-heart conversations. They didn't need to pay somebody to listen, and they just really sat with friends, and people were open and people were comfortable, really opening up, and that's the messianic spirit that we're trying to move into now at the end of time, where like we don't have to hide. And we can build really deep relationships that are founded upon self-disclosure, upon really feeling comfortable talking about what's actually going on, instead of just having shallow, surface-level sort of conversation. So Rabbi Nachman was trying to bring that into the world with this idea of Sichos HaRan in Likutei HaRan, which is Rabbi Nachman's primary sefer, Torah Nun Daled, in the 54th teaching. Rabbi Nachman speaks over there about something called Nekudas HaChaver. Nekudas HaChaver. Rabbi Nachman says that our whole spiritual journey, if a person's really on a journey and they're looking to grow and evolve and develop and really, to really serve Hashem, not just on the surface, he says there's going to be 3 points that are necessary to be maintained. The first point he calls Nekudas HaTzadik. That's our connection to a spiritual guide. In this case, it's Rabbi Nachman and his teachings, or all the teachings of all the tzaddikim. Rabbi Nachman is just sort of channeling the energy of the Baal Shem Tov, his great-grandfather, who himself is channeling the energy of the Arizal, who's channeling the energy of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. All the tzaddikim that were speaking the language of soul, of panemius, of interiority. Nekudas HaTzadik. A person has to have a contact with a guide. Otherwise, we don't, we're blind walking in the dark, That's point number 1. That's called Nekudas HaTzadik, literally point number 1. That's the point of the tzaddik. The second point, we'll actually do the third point first for the purpose of our teaching. The third point is Nekudas Atzmai, is a person's relationship with themselves. Is a person recognizing the degree to which they are unique as an individual, and understanding what they can contribute, understanding what their particular light is in the world that they need to shine, which ordinarily is coupled with their particular darkness. These two things are two sides of the same coin. And so like Reb Tzaddik says, a person can know what they were supposed to bring to the world to the degree that they understand what they uniquely struggle with. It's usually bound up. That's the indicator. So that's Nekudas Atzmai. That's the point of one's own self. And then the middle point, which we're going to learn about now in the context of Sichos HaRan 99, is called Nekudas HaChaver, is a good friend. Rabbi Nachman says if you don't have these 3 things, it's not going to work. You have to have Nekudas HaTzadik, to be connected to a tzaddik, to a guide, to a spiritual master. You have to be connected to a good friend, but a real good friend, a Sichos HaRan friend, a heart-to-heart friend, a therapy friend, And then Nekudas Atzma is to have a level and a degree of a relationship with our own selves, which is cultivated in mindfulness, cultivated in hispodidus, cultivated in self-care, in exercising and eating healthy, and in taking time for ourselves, and taking a walk by ourselves in hispodidus, speaking to Hashem in our own language alone. These 3 elements are crucial for the spiritual journey. So over here, Sichos HaRan at 99 is speaking about Nekudas HaChaver. To really speak to somebody about Yiddishkeit, about serving Hashem, but for real, not saying Divrei Torah, that you read it in some parsha sheet and you say it over. That's beautiful, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about getting really authentic, vulnerable, real, and speaking about what we're going through, what we're struggling with, where we're succeeding, where we're failing, and this is a mutual process. So unlike therapy, where it's sort of one-sided, in a proper, healthy, authentically deep Jewish friend relationship, it's mutual, and so it's symbiotic, where one person's going to open up about what they're going through, and their friend, as we're going to learn, might be able to give them chizuk, might be able to encourage them and help them see things from a different perspective, and then that person will open up, and this is called friendship, right? That's what a real friend is, which I bless us all with real friends. So Rabbi Nachman says, "K'she'echad medaber im chaveiroi b'yira shemayim." He's speaking about this. When a person sits together with a good friend and speaks b'yira shemayim, speaks about serving God, speaks about yira shemayim, which is why we're in this world. Sof davar hakol nishma. When all is said and done, at the end of the day, esalikim yira. The whole point is to come to an awareness of Hashem. Yira doesn't mean fear. It's a very, very bad translation. Yira means awareness. Yira comes from the same letters as to see, Ri'iyah, Yira, it's the same letters. To be aware of Hashem's presence. So when a Jew sits with another Jew and speaks about the Tachlis HaChaim, the very purpose for why we're in this world, which is Yira Shamayim, says the Rebbe, Naseh, there is produced in that moment two spiritual energies. And over here he's referring to Kabbalistic concepts that are very, very deep. But just to give you in a nutshell, Pi Chasidus, there's something called Ar Yashar. There's something called a direct, forthcoming light. Ar Yashar, it's straight and it's emerging in a direct sense. And then there's Va'ar Chayzer. There's a returning light. In Kabbalah, this has to do with the name Yud Ke Vav Ke, which is the energy of Chesed. That's the energy of expansivity. That's the energy of just a flowing state like water that goes from one source and just flows naturally to the other. That's Ar Yashar. And Ar Chozer is usually associated with the name Elokim, which is associated with the midah of Gvura, severity, but not just severity in the sense of withholding, but for those who were joining us for our Ana B'Koach series, which is just online for posterity, so you're able certainly to join now. But in those shiur, in the very first year, we spoke about the energy of Gvura as being more than just holding back, the opposite, the parallel to Chesed and not giving, but actually because it's embodied in the element of fire as opposed to water. So Chesed is water and Gvura is fire. It's more than that, because fire isn't just like not water. It's just not. It's not anything. It moves, but it moves in the opposite direction. So water comes down and fire moves up. Fire propels upward. So in Kabbalah, this is called Ar Yashar, which is Chesed, which is Yud Ke Vav Ke, and Ar Chayzer is the element of Gevura that's associated with fire, that's associated with upward motion. What does this mean? How are these two energies activated when one Jew sits with another Jew for Nekudas HaChaver, for Sichos Chaverim? So Rabbi Nachman says that V'lefa'amim, sometimes it happens that Makdim Ha'ar Chayzer Koidim Ha'ar Yashar. That even the returning light can sometimes, in the context of two friends sitting together, and again, we haven't understood yet what these terminologies mean in this context, but it can sometimes happen that the returning light emerges, is activated even before the Ar Yashar, even before the direct light. So what does all this mean? What's the direct light? What's the returning light? How does this work? So Rabbi Nachman explains, Kisha mekabel yesh le moyach katan ve'einu yachal lekabel divrei chaverei. Sometimes when a person is sitting and speaking to their friend and they are trying to help guide their friend is struggling with something, they want to help them. And so they reveal a certain idea, a teaching, some kind of guidance. And all of us, by the way, just parenthetically, all of us can do this. You don't have to be a big spiritual master to be able to give someone just a word of encouragement. One of the beautiful things about therapy And this whole concept of therapy being sort of professionally implemented, guided, with a very specific system of schooling and modalities and you know, that whole way, that the whole, I don't want to call it an industry, but the whole opportunity to sit with someone in therapy is so incredibly beautiful, because it brought back to the fore the very basic premises that every person needs to be heard, and that every person needs to be heard non-judgmentally, and that every person ought to have a little pocket in their lives where they can go and reflect on their life, you know, and so on. So all that is incredibly beautiful. One of the downsides is that because we generally think about the therapeutic relationship in the context of a person who's actually going to a therapist, right? That therapist having gone to school to be a therapist. So sometimes we think that if I'm not schooled, and if I haven't been trained, so then I have absolutely no right, you know, to sort of try to be a good friend, which is of course crazy, because for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, for the overwhelming majority of human life, there was no such thing as therapy, and presumably relationships were deep enough that they were actually therapeutic. Right? There's a difference between therapy and therapeutic. You know, many things can be therapeutic, but it isn't necessarily therapy per se. And so therapy has its place, but I just want to remind all of us that even if you're not a therapist, you can still be a good friend. You know, and sometimes we have a gut feeling about what our friend might need to hear. And like we, you know, so I caution against constantly second guessing ourselves. Obviously, if it's beyond our pay grade, signpost, you know, obviously if a person is dealing with something that you're not a professional, right? And so it's important that we have professionals. But by the same token, you know, if a person, you know, needs the Heimlich maneuver because they're choking, I don't think that because I'm not a medical professional, I can't touch them because I might do something wrong. So the person's choking, you know. So you gotta figure it out. You're not a doctor, but for this moment, you have to step up, you know. So I think it's important to point that out, and both can be true. So over here, says Rabbi Nachman, when a person wants to give guidance to their friend, and it's in a healthy way, and they're having Sichos HaRan, sometimes their friend is not capable of hearing what they're saying. Sometimes the friend is in such a constricted state, whether they're sad or whether, you know, they're just having a bad couple of days and things are not going their way. They have what's called moichin de katnos. They have a constricted consciousness. And even though what their friend is telling them is true and real and deep and beautiful and liberating, for that person, it's not the right moment. Their brain is closed. And they're not capable of really accepting and understanding what their friend is communicating. Says Rabbi Nachman, in a situation like that, even before the friend receives this quote unquote the teaching that this person is expressing, that this would be the aspect of Bechinas Or Yashar, that this is the direct light, that from the relative standpoint of the person who's giving some chizuk, giving encouragement, giving a kind word, giving some kind of guidance, that's Or Yashar, right? That's a direct light that's direct and directed at the friend, but the friend can't receive it. So it could be, says Rabbi Nachman, that even koydem lazeh, even before the friend got anything out of you sitting and telling them something and giving them strength, it is possible that mikabel hu mechaveroi, that you'll get something out of it. Even though your words were not directed for you. You meant for these words to strengthen and encourage your friend. Even before the friend gets encouragement out of it, it is possible that you yourself will emerge enriched. That you yourself will have gained something. And that's called Or Chayzer. That's called the light that you receive by virtue of having spoken in a way that was intended again to encourage someone else. But in this context, it's possible that you might even get more out of it than they did. And sometimes that actually happens first. that the friend is not in a state where they're capable right now of really appreciating, the beauty and the truth of what's being said. But something happens, says Rabbi Nachman, when you share encouragement with someone else. Oftentimes, you're the one who gains more out of it than they ever could. And it continues, because when a Jew speaks with another Jew in Yireh Shamayim, in a real heart-to-heart, open, authentic conversation about the things that are essential, fundamental to the very nature of us being here, being alive, being souls in bodies. Even if there is no Ar Yashar, right? Even if the friend does not get anything out of it, for whatever reason. Says Rabbi Nachman, it is possible that you will get even more from giving than the person to whom you were giving. Giving is getting. And this is true with tzedakah, obviously, as Chazal tell us, it's true in millions of ways. But it's also true when it comes to giving someone else chizuk, to encouraging someone else. Particularly, and Rabbi Nachman says this elsewhere, particularly if you don't feel that you're in a better off position. Like it could be somebody comes and confides in you. This happens often to me. People come and confide and they speak about things they're struggling with. I happen to be struggling with those things or very similar things in my own life. And so in giving them chizuk, more often than not, we ourselves get so much chizuk. We get strength and we get strengthened. Ki al yedeh, right? So aval pikein hu mekabel l'sayres mechaverei. It's possible that we're receiving hisayres, we're receiving strength and chizuk and energy and everything good from our friend. Ki al yedeh ha'haka, because Rabbi Nachman says that it's like a haka, it's like an echo. Sheyatzu adibura mipiv lechaverei. By him speaking these words out, it's like they emerge from one person's mouth, like the sound waves, and they hit the friend, right, in a metaphoric sense, and they return, they rebound, and they come back to the person who uttered them. And it's brought in our Arizal that this is exactly how it works. The Ar Yashar emerges, and there's something called a Hakah. It sort of hits, it bangs against the boundary, the border of the ultimate end of the space, so to speak, that God allotted for existence, and then it comes back up. It's an echo, it rebounds. It's a mirror image, it's a reflection. He says, like a person who just bangs a hammer at a wall, it will rebound toward the person. Because when momentum is channeled in one direction, not a big physics person, but just, I don't know, maybe the technical terminology, but all of us know this, right? That if a person throws a ball at a wall, so that energy will remain, right? And it will rebound. That energy remains within the element that a person is investing energy into, momentum into, whether it's throwing a ball, whether it's hitting a hammer, whether it's anything that a person does, and there's going to be a rebound. There's going to be a rebound. Says Rabbi Nachman, if that's true in physics, it is also true in metaphysics. It's also true spiritually. When a person speaks to somebody, the words will rebound. There's going to be a return of energy. So he says again, like a person hits a wall, the energy will return. And the same is true when a person gives strength to a friend, again, even if you don't think that you're holding anywhere, that you're not in the best place, it doesn't make a difference. Like I've written in the past, your tank doesn't have to be full in order to give to others. These are two separate things. You have two separate tanks, and the more that you give to someone else, even though you don't feel like you have enough for yourself, because it's two different cheshbonos, more often than not, the very act of giving fills up the tank that you thought was so depleted that you couldn't give. It's precisely when a person isn't holding. It's maybe, I'm saying precisely, maybe it could even be precisely, but it's certainly just generally true that if a person is not in a good place and they're struggling in emunah, but they know that it's just a phase, and they know that Gam Ze Yavar, like Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest man, needed to remember that constantly, put it on a ring, to remember, like, time heals. Time heals. Life is a journey. Things get clarified later in the journey, further along the road. And a person is strong enough in that faith that even though they're right now struggling, but that doesn't prevent them from helping someone else. That doesn't prevent them from saying a good word and an encouraging word to help someone else. So that fills up their own tank. It's the same thing when a person speaks to their friend. It's possible that their friend is not, it's not working. Their friend is not in a place where they're getting anything out of it. How much chizuk we get when we give chizuk. How much strength we walk away with. Al Yidei HaHakah, through the rebound that we were speaking about. And this is our yashar that emerges from our mouths, and it sort of reflects in the life of our friend, and it comes back to us because we hear our words, and it strengthens what we obviously knew so deeply that we were able to formulate those words and express those ideas, and it strengthens it, like the pasuk says in Tehillim. Rabbi Nachman quotes this elsewhere. He'emanti, says David HaMelech, I believed ki adaber, because I said I believed. And that even if a person is having trouble and challenge with the world of thoughts and ideas, speaking things out can solidify things in a very beautiful way. In a very, very beautiful way. There's a lot of power to that. A lot of power to speech. He'emanti dafka when ki adaber. And that's a very profound thing to remember. Therefore, says Rabbi Nachman, if he would just sort of think about these ideas to himself, it wouldn't have gotten inspired. He knew these ideas, right? Obviously, he's expressing them. They existed in his subconscious and his consciousness. But there's something about speech. That's what the Gemara says, it is a life for those who discover it. And the Gemara says, don't read it discover, read it l'moitzi ehem bepeh. The Torah gives life to those who utilize their mouth. This is very, very deep. Why? But who utilize their capacity to speak, which is the essence of the human being. The essence. Like we were just laying last week's parsha. Hashem invested a soul into the human being, says Targum Onkelos, a speaking spirit. That's what makes us different than animals. That's really the sum total of our humanity, is our speech. So when a person allows these words to emerge, then they reflect back onto you. And the same, by the way, the same is true for Hispodidus. The same is true for Hispodidus. Sometimes the chizuk you can get out of Hispodidus is just tremendous. When words are spoken out, they have a way of almost taking on a life of their own. There's also a spiritual tradition of spontaneous writing. Generally, in spiritual, culture, I'm not sure if in Yiddishkeit there's such a thing, maybe, but where people just have this inspired spirit upon them and they just write and write and write and write. And what emerges on the paper is far beyond anything that they could have consciously come up with. They just allow their subconscious to roll, But there's something about words. There's something unique about words that we end up getting more from what we say when we say it than those to whom we were saying it. Once a person speaks these words out, so you can get inspired. And again, the chiddush is, even if you don't see that they worked for your friend, but somehow you walk away with something. And again, because they returned to you through this aspect of hakah, through this aspect of the reflection of the mirrored image. The same way that it works again in physics, this is how it works in metaphysics. and Ar Yashar Shehu Al Yidei B'chinas Haka Kamavur B'Ksavim B'Havin. So this is incredibly powerful. I think, like, there's a number of things we learn from this teaching. Number one, the idea of Sichos Chaverim, right? To try to identify people in your life with whom you can sit down and reflect on life, that you feel comfortable opening up, and you know that they'll appreciate being given an opportunity for them to open up in a non-judgmental space. We don't, just have to pay people to not judge us. Like, we shouldn't judge each other. We should be okay, like, holding space for other people's stuff, because we have stuff, so they have stuff. So, like, it's just called being human. Like, that's great. So why can't we just talk? Like, and when I really think that when society gets to such a place, like, Mashiach will be here. That because that means that the ego is so out of the way that, like, there's no even havamina of perfection. Like, well, like, who's perfect? And adarabba, it's there's something so beautiful about being open and honest with our imperfections in such a way that we can help each other. Like I always say, malachim are perfect, and it's very beautiful, and it's maybe holy and shining and special, but they cannot help each other. They can't help each other because they don't need help. Okay, we say umekablin dain midain. Obviously, there's some level of interaction between them, but on the level of just the goodwill that emerges from the heart of a person, precisely and specifically when they're not being paid, right? To help someone else out, to be there for someone. Obviously, this world is the pinnacle of God's creation, even though He has billions of angels. Because what's more beautiful than that? There are no homeless angels. There are no beggar angels. There are no addicted angels who are struggling with stuff and need a helping hand, and need someone to listen and to be there along with them on the journey. That is specifically the preciousness of our humanity. What is chus? What a privilege. So when we get to such a place where we put our egos aside and we're able, again, it doesn't have to be mamish, on Facebook, but I mean, identify a few good people in your life that you can mamish be open with. I know for myself, if I didn't have my core group, a few good chaverim that, I couldn't live. Remember the Gemara, Oy chavrusa, Oy misusa. It's either a good friend who really cares about you as a reflection of you really caring about them, or it's really difficult to make it. It's really difficult to make it. So this is something that's so important, right? So that's the first thing, Sichos Chaverim. I'm reflecting on our conversations. What percentage of our conversations relate to the externality of life? And as much as that's also good, we're humans. We have adarabba. That's very beautiful. But, like, how many of our conversations, and you can do this easily by just scrolling up and down WhatsApp, from a day worth of conversations, did you bring the essence of life into those conversations? Was Hashem a part of those conversations? Was Yirah Shamayim a part of those conversations? Was becoming a little bit deeper, more sensitive, more honest, more like are we speaking and using our human capacity to speak as Tselem Elokim? Are we using that for the purpose that it was given to us as humans? So that's also something to be conscious of, these two things. And then I think a third point also to take out of this sikha before we look at the next one is the idea of being able to help somebody else even though you're not professionally trained. Again, obviously, if there are some things that are completely outside our pay grade, you could also be humble enough to say, I really don't know what to say. That's okay. That's fine. Like, that's okay to say, and still to be there for the person. But if it occurs to you that there's something you can say to someone who's coming to you as a friend, not as a therapist who knows all the theories, but just as a good friend, and you're able, as another fellow human journeyer, to be able to say something helpful, say something helpful. That again, I want to stress that I'm cautioning against the sterilization, so to speak, of this idea of therapy to such a degree where, if you're not a trained therapist, so you can't be anything other than a really shallow friend who just, it's beyond them, to listen to someone else's pain, to try to be there for them. It's a scam. It's a big scam. Because again, it didn't used to be therapists. It used to just be friends who were just good friends. And today we've unfortunately forgotten what that means. And so we created this institution called therapy. But that's what every friend used to be. That's what friendship is. And I think that we can bring that back. We can make friendship, you'll forgive me, great again. And this is very important to do. Okay, so and then the fourth point is that even if the friend is not getting anything out of what you're saying, you will, and you don't have to have your whole tank filled up, before trying to fill up somebody else's tank as well. Okay, here's a very brief teaching, and with this we'll close this year for today. Says the Heilige Rabbi Nachman in Sichos HaRan Kuf 100, which again there are 308 small little teachings in the Sefer, so we're about a third of the way there, which is a huge bracha, unbelievable. And I really hope that one day we'll be able to print all this shiurim out and put it in print, because the series has been very special, really, really very special. And Be'ezus Hashem, one day at some point, when AI develops a little bit more, and we'll just do it with a click of a button, and it'll just be there, So I'm just gonna wait. I'm gonna wait this one out for a couple of years, or a couple of months, or weeks, or days. Okay, Shemati b'shem Rabbeinu Zal Mikvar. So it says Rav Nassan, another teaching that we've heard from Rabbi Nachman in the past, and this is a comment on the pasuk referring to Yosef HaTzadik when he is stuck in the tension, in the battle, in the struggle with Eshes Potiphar, and he's caught in a makom of sakana. And the Yetzer Hara is raging, and etc., etc., etc. And what happens is that as he's trying to pull away, vatispeseu bebigdai, Eshes Potiphar grabs hold of his garment, of his cloak, and the pasuk is vayanas vayetze achutza. He, like the oldest trick in the book, like kids running around with backpacks. You get out of the backpack and you run, So he gets out of the garment, and vayanas vayetze achutza, and he leaves. So what's this idea of a tispeseu bebigdai? What does this mean? She grabbed him by the garment. Says Rabbi Nachman, what that means for you and me, because obviously every word of the Torah is infinitely relevant for every person in every era and every stage and age and background and circumstance, everything. What this means is Shabal davar vasitra achra tofeses esa adam bebigdai. Because in this context, Eshes Potiphar is mamish the Yetzer Hara, right? That's what it is. She is the baldavar. She is the Yetzer Hara attempting to get Yosef HaTzadik to sin, to deviate from his essence, from who he is, from his holiness. See, he says, if you read this pasuk that's talking about Eshes Potiphar to actually be referring to the Yetzer Hara stam, just in general, says the Rebbe, so the Torah is telling us, Vatispeseu, you know how the Yetzer Hara grabs a person? Bebigdai, in his garment, which means that the Yetzer Hara causes a person to become overly concerned with, it's a beautiful metaphor over here, it means clothing, but it means external things, which is what clothing are. That's what it means. Now it depends how literally you want to get with it, right? On the most literal level, this obsession, with certain kinds of clothes and styles and this and the other thing is a waste. It's just a waste, right? And it's reflective on a certain level of a lack of awareness as to what's really important in life, because these things really don't ultimately matter. And this is something that all of us, to one degree or another, struggle with, and we have to ask ourselves always, who is this for? Is this for Hashem, or is this for me as an egoic individual entity? Who is this for? So obviously dressing respectable is important, and obviously there's aspects of tznius, but there's also aspect of, especially for Shabbos, kavod Yom Tov, and so on. And all of that's real, and that's good, and that's also important. That's part, the messenger of the king needs to wear royal clothing. There's no question about that. But when it becomes, and it's very subtle, like everything in life is extraordinarily subtle, and the line of distinction is very thin. It's a very narrow bridge. It's a hair's breadth of a difference between a person that's in it for their own glorification, and it's important to them to wear certain clothes so that people perceive them in a certain way and so on, which is like, that's the road to Gehenna, from that standpoint. I don't mean like hell, like in the next world. I mean that's the road into the darkness. Or to say, no, this is for Kvod Shamayim. And a person, it takes a lot of honesty, it takes a lot of self-reflection, introspection around these issues. And over here, so that's speaking about clothing. But I think that we can utilize this as an isolated example of something broader, which might be more relevant, which has to do with, let's say, the car a person drives, or the kind of house a person lives in. These are all begadav, you understand? It's the same idea. These are this worldly assets, facets of our lives that are necessary for human functionality, but there's a huge spectrum as to the way in which we can choose to engage with these things. What is important and what is not important. It says Rabbi Nachman, "Vatispesehu bebigdai." The Satan, the Yetzer Hara, the Malach HaMaves, there's an arch enemy that's here to literally destroy us by diverting us, which is a chet, causing us to deviate from the true intention of why we're in this world in the first place, which is to focus on soul and to help other people discover soul, and to allow the soul of the world, which is God, to manifest by engaging with every aspect of life with consciousness and depth and bigness and greatness. The Yetzer Hara is vatispesehu bebigdai. The way that he gets us to do that, and in this sense it's connected to the previous Sicha, is by having conversations about flat tires, right? You understand? Or politics, which is very relevant now, or geopolitics, or anything that is not fundamentally connected to the emes that will outlive all of these things, in the light of which these things don't ultimately matter, because God is running the world, not whichever president or whichever prime minister or whichever anything. And so let's focus on that, and let's speak about that, because when election day is over and none of the other stuff is relevant anymore, that will still be relevant forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, fundamentally. Ani Rishon v'ani HaRan, forever and ever. That will be the only thing that's relevant when everything is said and done. Like we said before, Sof Davar Hakol Nishma, like at the end of the day, okay, Es Elikim Yirah, because that's all there is left, because that's all there ever was. And so if that's what it means to be a Yosef HaTzadik, to be a person who's connected, mamish, in the deepest way to the truth, to the emes, to Hashem. So naturally, the energy that seeks to obscure that connection, to draw us away, is going to try to drag us away from the essence of life in our thoughts, in our conversations that relates to the Sicha we just learned, and our actions, and to pull us into the exteriority of life, into the guf, into the body of life, away from the neshama of life. Says Rabbi Nachman, good. That's these two words in this pasuk. Which happens to come from Bar Mitzvah, Parshas Vayeshev. Vatispesehu bebigdai. This is where the Yetzer Hara gets us. He pulls us into the aspect of the beged. Ki tirdas et starchus malbushim bebegadim shal adam himavav l'ma'id esa adam. This, that a person needs this kind of thing or that kind of thing, or even, and this is also important, there are things that are absolutely necessary. A person needs clothing, but a person, let's say a person's clothes is all ripped and worn. So you also have to understand that in the historical context, that 280 or so years ago, it was a lot bigger of a deal. They didn't have like TJ Maxx or Marshalls or whatever it was, where you can just hop on over and buy something. It was an ASEC. The whole thing was an ASEC. You had tailors and people sewed things. It wasn't like, it wasn't anything like today. It's very difficult for us to understand how people lived, in the way that they lived. And it's important for us to try to always consider that historical element when we're learning things like this. So you can imagine what it was like then. But today, again, fill in the blank. Whatever's relevant for us in our lives, The tirda of the necessity of malbushim ubegadim mevalvel ma'edes adam. They can confuse a person. They can cloud a person's mind. And they can prevent a person from serving Hashem. And this is what it means that the Satan grabs hold of a person by their beged, by the externality of life. Ach mishu bal nefesh. But a person who's a bal nefesh, what a wonderful phrase. A lot of times you find in halacha, if there's something that's a chumrah, something that a bal nefesh will be machmir. What a beautiful phrase. What's a bal nefesh? It doesn't just mean a person who is a soulful person, because a nefesh is soul, and bal nefesh is like a person who is a spiritual master person. I think that it means something else. I think that over here, nefesh is a negative thing, seen as the lowest iteration of the 5 different aspects of the soul. Nefesh is the dam. It's the purely, a sort of subconscious, unconscious, visceral, just knee-jerk human-based reactions to things. That's the nefesh, taiva, just the lower elements of the person. I like to think that a bal nefesh doesn't just mean a spiritual person. It means a person who has mastered their nefesh. And I think that's what it might actually mean. It's not usually the way it's translated. Usually it's like a bal nefesh, a spiritual person. I think it means more than that. I think it means a person who has mastered their nefesh. And the lower you go spiritually, in a certain sense, it's just a metaphor because we're not speaking about things that are physical, so there's no higher or lower. But it's synonymous with external. The higher you go, the more internal you go. The lower you go, the more external you go. And so nefesh is external. The nefesh is just it's the lowest. Imagine if all we were was our nefesh, we'd be absolute animals in human form. It's the most external part of a person. You go from nefesh to ruach. Okay, it's deeper. Ruach is already the emotions. Ruach is in the lave. It has to do with a person's feelings. So that's deeper. And then you move up, more interior, to a person's mind that is able to guide their emotions. You move even deeper up to chaya, right, to the person's worldview that guides their thinking. And then you move to the point of yechida, which is the ratzon of a person that's the most interior. It's the highest, but it's the most essential. And it's the same thing over here. The Yetzer Hara wants to grab us by our beged, meaning the most external aspect. The Yetzer Hara wants to grab us by the nefesh. So Rabbi Nachman's wording is precise. Ach mishu bal nefesh, a person who's in mastery of their nefesh, who doesn't outsource their consciousness to the lowest external most aspect of their identity, but a person who's driving the horse, and like they say, not that the horse is leading them, chazak b'Hashem, and a person's heart is mamish, plugged in strongly into the awareness of why it is that they're on this planet, supported, like we just learned in the beginning of this year, by these 3 nekudas: the nekuda of the tzaddik, the nekuda of the chaver, and the nekuda of one's own self relationship. So the person's, it doesn't bother. This is not what's occupying the person. It's just not. Not for the men and not for the women. It's just not. It doesn't matter. These things don't matter. And a person is constantly reminding themselves of that, but they live a higher life. Because he doesn't have the nicest suit, he doesn't have she doesn't have the fanciest sheitel, whatever it is. It doesn't bother the person. It's not their focus. The person is soaring above it. A person is not entrenched down and stuck into it. And this is what Yosef Tzaddik did. Vayanach bigdai etzla vayanas. So you know what to do? Good. Let the Yetzer Hara keep the beged. It's fine. It's those things are they're arbitrary. If we have them, great. If not, it's also fine. It's not the essence of life. Let go. That's what it really means. That's what he did. He let go. He let go of it. Let go of it. And this is what all of us need to work on. I don't want to say all of us. What I need to work on is this thing of just trying to let go of the things that don't really matter, because that's where the Yetzer Hara is going to get you. So those are the things that we have to let go, because that's the contact point between the Yetzer Hara and us. That's the only achiza. That's the only place that the Yetzer Hara has a hold on us. Doesn't have a hold deeper. That's the contact point. So if we let go of that, so then we're free. Ezehu ashir hasameach bechelko. These things sound like cliches until we actually start to implement them. The imlay achshav, I'll give you another cliche that's applicable to applying cliches. Imlay achshav emasai. So these are all nice things that you can have on your fridge. But once we actually start to realize, like, life is passing. Imlay achshav emasai. If we're not going to start now to develop this consciousness of Ezu Asher, of being Sameach Bechalkai, of Ayanach Bigdai Etzla V'Yanas, so we're going to stay in misery. We're going to stay in misery. And who wants misery? So we can let it go. We can let it go. It's freeing. It's liberating. Al tikrei charas ala luchos. The Gemara says, don't read it, that the luchos were, that Aseres HaDibros were etched onto the luchos. Ella cherus ala luchos. The luchos are freeing, absolutely freeing. I just have to share with you. I learned one of my favorite Sfarim on Chumash is the Sefer Torah Tamima. Torah Tamima was written by the son of the Aruch HaShulchan, something called Rabbi Baruch Epstein. He was a businessman, but in all of his spare time, he was a huge goyin, and it's a very unique and very beautiful Sefer Torah Tamima. And he writes over there that the pasuk tells us in last week's parsha, Lo toiv heis adam levadai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Adam it's not a good thing for a person to be alone. Asala Ezer connected. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, let's go ahead and create a chava, that he should have a mate, that they shouldn't be lonely, should be together. And the pasuk says, Al-Kaini azav Adam as avibes ima v'yidbak be'ishta ve'yolav asar echad. Therefore, let a person leave their parents, their mother and their father, and let them go and connect to their spouse. V'yolav asar echad, one entity. So amazing. What like abstracted of everything else, what a conception of marriage, right? Unbelievable. Even if the Torah didn't tell us anything else, just use those words. V'yolav basar echad. Like, it's incredible. Almost incredible, The Medrash comments on this. I'm not sure if it's right now if it's a Medrash or a Gemara, but that from here, there's probably in the Gemara, there's a halacha that even if a person was married and had many children, was Makayim Peri V'Rivya, in as much as they can, every person should try to stay to be married. Even if a person is divorced, or a person is nebuch, the wife is neftaris, either way, a person's an alman or almana, a person should try very, very much. It's a chiyuv, for a person to try to get married, and that they shouldn't live alone. And the lashon of the Gemara is that it's a mitzvah. It's a commandment for a person to be married. Says the Torah Tamima, where's there any lashon of commandment here? It doesn't say anything about God commanding Adam to be married. It just says, Lo tov hayas Adam lavade. It's not good for a person to be alone. So where does the Gemara learn from here that this is something that you need to do? You need to do. It's an eitzah. It's a taiva. It's just God is saying, listen, it's better for you this way because it's not good to be alone. Says the Torah Tamima. He says, good, you're right. It doesn't say a lashon of a tzivoy. It doesn't say the terminology of a commandment. But he says the depth of all of the commandments that actually do utilize this terminology of a tzivui, of a commandment, the soul of it is these two words, lo tov, because it won't be good for you otherwise. So he says this, that in the commandments it says lo sigsal, don't steal. It's not like, oh, okay, it's a commandment. God, what can you do? God said not to steal. He says the soul of that, what we need to hear in loy sigzal is loy toiv sigzal. It's not going to be good for you if you steal. Not that God doesn't want me to steal, but that the essence of the whole Torah is that God knows what's good for us. L'toiv lanu kol hayamim, the pasuk says in Devar. Hashem wants it for us. Ashrecha ba'olam hazeh v'toiv lach l'olam haba. It's good for you in the next world. It's good for you in this world. This is the good life. This is the good life. That's it. There's nothing else. What was it? Chana ben Ari, barachti mimcha, lo matzati klum. It says, I ran away from you. I didn't find anything. There's nothing. There is nothing. And so he says, so Chazal knew that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Adam and Chava, it's not good to be alone, so that's a mitzvah. Because all the mitzvahs are only good advice. Like the Zohar Kadosh calls them Taryag Atin Deoraisa, 613 pieces of advice. Good, 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 deep, good advice. And so this is what's going on over here. This is the Inyan. To live a good life, to let go of this stuff. And to be people that are plugged into the emes, the things that really, really matter. It doesn't mean that we don't make forays out, so to speak, into regular life because we're normal people and we have families and we do care about politics and we, etc. It says like all this is normal, that's fine. You know, we're gonna wander the courtyards of existence. That's fine. But shesulim beveis Hashem, to attempt to the degree possible to be people who are planted in the base Hashem. And that's where we really are. And the other things is external. But I don't make from the external internal and from the internal external. Because that's what the HaRan wants, that it should drag us out into the external. Let it go. To run away. And this is not our focus. This is not like, this is not, yeah, we do what we need to do, but we're not like mashkiach on it. It's not, that's not where it's at. Every person, again, trying as best as they can through learning the Torah of the tzaddik, like we said in Kudas HaTzaddik, through finding good friends, going back to the beginning, and speaking in Yirah Shamayim, Sichos Chaverim, real conversations, not just stam, on the beged of life, but real conversations. And Nekudas Atzmai, ultimately self-discovery, spending time alone, contemplating what I really want. That's the most important meditation for a person, to sit and ask themselves, what do I really want? Because everything flows forth from there. And if we don't have clear what we want, and we're just like on some level in autopilot, whether it's in our thinking, in our feeling, in our acting, which is nefesh, ruach, neshama, right, in ascending order, it's tragic. It's totally tragic. It's totally tragic. What a waste. What a waste. So this is the main thing. Who am I and what do I want? That's Nikudas Atzmai. That's his spoididos. That's his sponinos, contemplation, introspection. And these three things in conjunction can Be'ezras Hashem enable us to escape the Satan who's grabbing us about this bigdai and avayanach bigdai. We should be zeicha to let go of the beged, etzla vayanas, and to escape and to live real lives. And we don't lose a thing. On the contrary, we gain. We think we lose because the Yitzhar is still holding us by our beged. But this b'seu b'bigdai, we don't lose a thing. On the contrary, we gain, we gain, we gain, we gain. We gain. Hashem should help us live gainful lives, mamish lives that are full of quality. And even though the quantity on whatever level is, but who cares? The quality of our happiness comes from being plugged into the soul. Mamish, the soul. We should be zeicha to live it. These are very, very important times we're living in, obviously, in history, in our lifetimes, and in the cycle of the year. This is in a certain sense, these months now, Ram Cheshvan, these Kislev, these months is what I've written about this in the past, and we'll finish with this. I've probably mentioned it in Shirim as well. That sometimes there's this feeling of coming out of Tishrei and like you stumble into like the void, like no man's land. Like where do you go from here? And ki ilu, like Chag, like Tishrei is the pinnacle of spiritual connection, and then like it's all downhill. And I mamish see it differently. I mamish see Tishrei with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot as base camp at the foot of Everest. Like it's just prepping us. It's giving us what we need
on Rosh Hashanah from that standpoint of the Chachma, the big picture vision. Yom Kippur, working out the details of what I need to fix and work on. Sukkot, like a little in an incubator, sort of like a way of experiencing that to some degree and to really bask in that. And now is the real thing. Like now is real life. Cold, dark, dreary days, particularly here in London. I'm looking at it right now through my window, and everywhere else. This is it. This is Everest. This is the Iker Dir B'Tachtonim that culminates in Hanukkah, and then from there we move to Purim, and Purim is Pesach, and Pesach is Shavuos, and by that time, the whole year is over again. Like this is it. That's why Mar Cheshvan, it's bitter because it doesn't have anything special, but it's Ram Cheshvan. It's the top of Mount Everest. And so Mamish, all of that was a hachana for this. So Be'ez Hashem, we should be zeicha to really live that way. Be activated, inspired, full of light. And even when we don't feel so full of light, give light to others. And Be'ez Hashem will benefit from the mirrored reflection of the light coming back to bask in its glory, and we should only hear Basuras Tovas, Be'ezus Hashem. Chazak v'amatz. I'm so excited to have continued the series, and thank you to all of you for joining. It's so wonderful. I feel like, I don't know, it could be timing wise, but we haven't had like our chevra in the shirim, and it's very special to have you guys back. It makes all the difference. So thank you, and wishing everybody a beautiful rest of your week. Be'ezus Hashem Yisbarach.